Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 7 waiver wire ads for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to be going in depth into 10 different players that I believe you guys should be looking to pick up off of the waiver wire right now. But before we get on into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure to hit that like button down below. It would help us out a ton. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 7 top waiver wire ads. We begin at number 10 with my number 10 waiver wire ad of the week. Tim Patrick, wide receiver of the Denver Broncos, going up against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland on Thursday Night Football. With Jerry Jeudy's return being imminent at this point, will it happen this week? Maybe. Will it happen next week? Probably, but with the kind of talk about him coming back relatively soon, that we should start to kind of backtrack a little bit on getting super hyped about Tim Patrick. Now, in this game up against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland, I would not be surprised at all if Tim Patrick had a fantastic game, because he is the clear number 2 wide receiver in this offense without Jerry Jeudy, and it seems as though Jerry Jeudy is not going to be playing in this game. But at the end of the day, when we are looking at a long-term standpoint, I do not believe Tim Patrick is a long-term option for your fantasy football roster. But if you're just looking for a 1-week rental at the wide receiver position with a decent amount of upside, then you should be looking towards Tim Patrick. Last week, up against the Las Vegas Raiders, Tim Patrick had 3 receptions on 6 targets for 42 yards and a touchdown. I think he could put up very similar numbers this week up against the Cleveland Browns, and I expect him to play relatively solid. Now, again, this is not a guy that I want on my team for the long run. This is just a guy that I feel as though you can be very excited about this matchup up against the Browns, as it seems like Jerry Jeudy is not going to be playing in this game. Next up at number 9, we have famous Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston, quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, this week going up against the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. Now, it appears that Michael Thomas may be back in this game, which would be great for Jameis Winston. If Michael Thomas isn't back, I'm still pretty confident in Jameis Winston, because to me, Jameis Winston is going to be just as risky and have basically the exact same upside regardless on if Michael Thomas is in the game or not. And with that high risk comes the high reward, where Jameis Winston absolutely potentially torches the Seattle Seahawks defense. Jameis is a risk every single week, but this is a risk I am willing to take, because the Seattle Seahawks defense does not look very good at all. Last game was in week number 5 for Jameis Winston, because he was on a bye last week. He went up against the Washington football team in week number 5, having 15 completions on 30 attempts for 279 passing yards for 4 touchdowns and 1 INT. Now, again, any given week, Jameis Winston could throw 5 touchdowns and throw 5 interceptions. Some games, this man will throw 4 interceptions and no touchdowns. But going up against the Seattle Seahawks, I like the odds that Jameis Winston has one of his bigger games on the season. I expect him to play quite well up against a not-so-hot Seattle Seahawks defense in prime time in Seattle. My next ad here is a player from the Seattle Seahawks, Rashaad Penny, running back of the Seahawks, going up against the New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football. Alex Collins hurt his hip/his glute in that game up against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday Night Football, and that means that Alex Collins may miss a week. Now, is it guaranteed right now that Alex Collins is out? No, but based upon what I have seen, maybe he doesn't end up playing, and that severely ups the upside of Rashaad Penny, because Chris Carson is still out for at least the next couple of weeks, so Penny will slot in as the running back number 2 if Alex Collins is good to go. But if Alex Collins is not good to go, my thought process is that Rashaad Penny will slot in as the number 1 back on the team, at least for this game up against the Saints defense. Penny has played in just 1 game this season, and he is coming off of the IR to potentially play in this game based upon everything that I've seen from Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll's talking about how he looks fast, how he looks good, so I expect 100% that Rashaad Penny will play in this game. He's a lot like Tim Patrick, where to me, he is just kind of a 1-week rental, but if Alex Collins is out, that rental could pay off big time for your fantasy football roster. Next up, we have wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns, Donovan Peoples-Jones, going up against the Denver Broncos this week on Thursday Night Football. Odell ended up hurting his shoulder in that game last week, and he is in doubt to play on Thursday Night Football. Jarvis Landry, it's kind of up in the air, right? Maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't. Baker Mayfield, also banged up. So it seems like maybe we could be seeing Case Keenum. I think a lot of people are a little too high on Donovan Peoples-Jones this week because even if Odell doesn't play and if Jarvis doesn't play, what happens if Baker Mayfield doesn't play? Or Baker Mayfield does play and that left shoulder injury still continues to aggravate him and maybe he's not able to throw the ball as accurately, which is what we've seen ever since he sustained that injury up against the Houston Texans earlier on in the season. So again, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is in a very solid situation for the wide receiver core. But if Baker Mayfield isn't the quarterback and it's Case Keenum, you probably want to pump the brakes a little bit. And with this game happening on Thursday Night Football, to me, that makes the likelihood that Baker Mayfield is the starting quarterback feel as though that it is a lot lower, at least in my opinion. Week number 6, up against the Arizona Cardinals, Donovan Peoples-Jones shined. He had 4 receptions on 5 targets for 101 yards and 2 total touchdowns in that game, gaining 57 yards and a touchdown on a Hail Mary. So, again, while, hey, that was sick, he made this cool fucking catch to end the halftime, that's awesome. That's cool. But at the end of the day, what are the odds that's going to happen this week? What are the odds that he's going to be making all these plays when Case Keenum is throwing him the ball? To me, a lot less likely. So I still like Donovan Peoples-Jones, but I think people need to really assess the situation as a whole before they just blow all of their fab dollars on a wide receiver that may not be in the greatest of situation unless Baker Mayfield ends up playing. Next up, we got Ricky Seals-Jones, tight end of the Washington football team, going up against the Green Bay Packers this week in Green Bay. But before we learn more about Mr. Ricky Seals-Jones, I'd like to let you guys know that we have partnered with Yahoo Fantasy this NFL season to bring you guys some great offers, all of which you can find in the links in the video description. First, we have an exclusive limited time offer which gets you guys 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. To qualify, you need to be new to Yahoo, sign up for an account with the link in the description of today's video, deposit, and play. That's it. Yahoo will send us your name after you play in your first paid contest, and we'll reach out to you via the email with your coupon. If you would like immediate access because you want to play today, then go ahead and email support@awesemo.com and we'll get you set up. Just to emphasize, this offer is for new Yahoo users only. You can also claim a free $10, which can be used to enter any Yahoo contest, including tonight's $150,000 Monday Night Football baller. Make sure to use our DFS tools and projections designed specifically for Yahoo to give you guys your best shot at winning big. So guys, make sure you do check out Yahoo DFS. The link is down below in the description. Back on into Mr. Ricky Seals-Jones. With Logan Thomas out, Ricky Seals-Jones has been exploding like fucking Mount Vesuvius. In week number 5 up against the New Orleans Saints, this man had 5 receptions on 9 targets for 41 yards. And then last week up against the Kansas City Chiefs in a game that I expected to be a back and forth affair, a very high scoring game. It was for the Chiefs, not so much for the Washington football team. But even with that said, Ricky Seals-Jones did still have quite the solid game, having 4 receptions on 6 targets for 58 yards and 1 touchdown. I expect Ricky Seals-Jones to have another solid showing up against the Green Bay Packers. I don't think that this is as great of a matchup when you compare the matchup of going up against the Chiefs versus the Green Bay Packers, but I still believe that Ricky Seals-Jones appears to be a key piece in this offense, and I expect him to look good this week up against the Green Bay Packers. Next up, we got Rhamondre Stevenson, running back of the New England Patriots, going up against the Jumbo Jets, the New York Jets at home in New England. Damian Harris is banged up again. Banged up the week before, banged up last week, so that could lead to Stevenson getting more touches. Now, say Damian Harris is good to go because Damian Harris appears to be a tough man. He got banged up and was able to go last week, so I'm not 100% ruling out Damian Harris from playing, but even if Damian Harris plays, it does appear that Stevenson is the clear number 2 back behind Mr. Damian Harris, and with James White out, open up the door for more receptions to come the way of Rhamondre Stevenson. Last week, up against the Dallas Cowboys, he had 5 rushes for 23 yards and a touchdown, as well as 3 receptions on 3 targets for 39 yards. So as you guys can tell in this video, the running back pool isn't super deep this week because there wasn't a humongous injury. Now, there technically was one that we are going to be talking about, but that role by the big running back injury may be filled by the other huge running back that is on their team. So there wasn't too many big injuries to lead to any given running back just skyrocketing up the rankings, skyrocketing up the waiver wire pickups. But I do still like Rhamondre Stevenson a decent amount, even if Damian Harris is healthy. And next up, we got T.Y. Hilton, wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts, going up against the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. T.Y. Hilton had his return game after missing the first 5 games of the season up against the Houston Texans this week, having 4 receptions on 4 targets, 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 80 yards. Now, this is not a guy that I'm super excited about because I still believe that Michael Pittman is the number 1 wide receiver, and he did it up against the Houston Texans. Name a wide receiver that's any good that couldn't have a big game up against the Houston Texans, right? But if the Colts are on this turnaround, if the Colts are marching further and further, marching closer and closer to having a successful season, then maybe, just maybe, T.Y. Hilton will be worthy of this top-end pickup. Next up, we got Rashod Bateman, wide receiver of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Rashod Bateman right now appears to be the number 2 wide receiver, clearly behind Hollywood Brown. Despite missing the first 5 games of the season, very similar to Mr. T.Y. Hilton, it appears that Rashod Bateman was never gone at all. It appears that he just moved his way on in, moseyed his way on in to the number 2 role up against the LA Chargers last week. Now, he had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 29 yards, so that's nothing to get super excited about, right, just off of that matchup. But at the end of the day, he is still the number 2 wide receiver on a very solid offense at Baltimore. And this week they get the Cincinnati Bengals, so the upside of Rashod Bateman is very high in this matchup. Next up, we get to where the injuries actually happened. D'Ernest Johnson, running back of the Cleveland Browns, going up against the Denver Broncos in Thursday Night Football. Kareem Hunt is out right now, quote-unquote, several weeks with a calf injury. 9-inch Nicholas Chubb was out last week with a calf injury, and it's likely that he could probably be out on Thursday Night Football, if not longer. Because, again, it's a quick turnaround. It's Thursday Night Football. If it was on Sunday, maybe Nick Chubb would play. But maybe not, because some people around the sphere of the internet seem to be a little bit worried about Mr. Chubb. And if that is the case, and Chubb and Hunt are out for multiple games, then we could see a high dosage of D'Ernest Johnson as well as Demetric Felton. Now, it appears that Felton's going to be the number 2, and Johnson will be the number 1 guy running the ball on this team. Last week up against the Arizona Cardinals, he had 1 rush for 2 yards and 1 reception on 1 target for 7 yards, but that was with the Browns in a terrible game script because they were getting pounded in that game, whereas maybe if the game was a little bit closer, they would have relied a little bit more heavily on the run, and maybe that would have given more touches to Johnson. This week up against the Denver Broncos, while I am a little bit worried about Baker Mayfield potentially not being there, I still think Case Keenum will be decent enough if he does have to be the starter for the team, that D'Ernest Johnson will be just fine. But again, not a guy I'm super duper high on, but when injuries happen, you have to talk about the backup running backs. My final waiver wire ad of the week is J.D. McKissic, running back of the Washington football team, going up against the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau Field. Gibson has been dealing with a shin injury for what seems like the whole season at this point, and he was in the game, he was out of the game a bunch last week up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and there's a solid chance that seems like maybe the best thing to do is put him on ice, riverboat Ron. You ice him for maybe a week or 2, and then you go balls to the wall and you play him 2 weeks from now, because then maybe he'll heal up. But doing this kind of shenanigans of him being in the game, then he's out of the game, then he's in the game, then he's out of the game, it makes no fucking sense. Why not just sit him down? Now, will riverboat Ron do what I'm telling him to do? He's not watching this video, so probably not. Maybe Gibson plays this week, but I think there is a solid chance that he ends up being out up against the Green Bay Packers. And this situation, when Gibson and when J.D. McKissic are both in the game at the same time, is about as mind-boggling confusing as it gets. It's a bananas situation because there are some games where Gibson looks like Christian McCaffrey. He's getting all the touches. He's getting the carries. He's getting the dump-offs thrown his way. And then there's other games where Antonio Gibson is like Houdini, and he turns invisible, and Riverboat Ron doesn't give him the ball, and then McKissic vultures a touchdown on the goal line. So it's a very confusing situation, but at the end of the day, if Gibson is banged up, you better believe there's going to be an increased role weekly for J.D. McKissic until Antonio Gibson is healthy. Last week up against the Kansas City Chiefs, he had 8 rushes for 45 yards. He also had 8 receptions on 10 targets. 10 targets, that's a lot of targets for 65 yards. So buy on into J.D. McKissic, because even if Gibson's healthy, I feel as though that J.D. McKissic is going to cut into that workload with him being banged up. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, because again, not only is it free, we put out this content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out as well. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY. Have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, good boy.